At the very beginning, no one paid attention to this disaster first. There was a sweltering heat that lasted for dozens of days, and the highest temperature even exceeded degrees Celsius. Subsequently, the fields dried up, and the lakes dried up by the time people truly realized the severity of the problem. The end of the world had already arrived. I'm dying of heat. Why is it so hot this year? Yeah, it's been over degrees Celsius for 3 consecutive days. This is driving people crazy with the heat. On the way home from work, pedestrians were in a hurry. Almost no one lingered on the main road. Everyone entered the buildings at the fastest speed to escape the heat. I stopped my car at the intersection and waited for the traffic light. I glanced at my phone. It was. And the temperature was degrees Celsius. Although it was already close to evening, the sun hadn't set yet. The sunlight and the continuous high temperature gave people the illusion that it was still noon. Today's temperature was more abnormal than usual. When the green light came on, I hesitated for a moment. Instead of driving straight home, I turned left and went to the largest supermarket in the city, intending to purchase some supplies. Today was Friday, and tomorrow would be the weekend. If the weather remained above degrees Celsius in the following days, I would apply for compensatory leave from the company and stay at home for a few more days to avoid the heat. Anyway, I had just signed a large project day, and the company shouldn't reject my leave application. I rushed into the supermarket and headed straight for the fresh produce section. I made a large purchase of some daily ingredients, and then ran to the frozen food section to buy some steaks, frozen fish, and frozen shrimp. When passing by the daily necessities section, I found that the sanitary pads and tampons I usually used were on sale. On a whim, I bought 2 large bags, and the shopping cart was immediately filled. Do you need any help? A young waiter came up and asked me. With a shy smile on his face, I nodded, gave him the cart, and pushed another one myself. I walked into the canned food section and took 2 cans of each kind. Then I entered the snack section and swept up a lot of melon seeds and potato chips. Would you like to buy some beverages? Our large bottle combination package of Coca-Cola and Sprite is on sale, only yuan. The young waiter suggested. I thought it made sense, although I usually lead a healthy lifestyle and don't drink beverages often. How could I eat potato chips without having some Coca-Cola? So I went to the beverage section and carried 5 combination packages, a total of 10 bottles. I also asked the young man to help carry 2 cases of mineral water, filling up the 3rd shopping cart. I thought that was it, but when I came out and passed by the grain section, I suddenly slapped my head. The rice bucket at home was almost empty, and I needed to buy some. So I continued to trouble the young waiter and asked him to carry 2 bags of rice, for I took 5 bags of instant noodles myself and stuffed them into the gaps in the 2nd shopping cart. At this point, the 3 shopping carts were fully loaded. When I checked out, it cost yuan and cents. Do you need us to deliver the goods to your home? The young waiter asked again. I shook my head. No, just help me move them to my car. Are you sure? These things are really heavy. The young waiter seemed very eager to serve me, but I still refused. I just asked him to help me put all the things into my spacious trunk. When I closed the trunk door, the young waiter seemed to sigh, but I didn't pay much attention and drove home directly. After divorcing my ex-husband 5 years ago, I went on a random trip that lasted for half a year. Finally, I chose to stay in this slow-paced 3rd-tier city. Having left everything I was familiar with, now I rent a place to live alone in a high-end residential community in the suburbs. I live on the th floor, which is neither too high nor too low. There are 2 households on each floor, and there is an independent security door. Perhaps due to different activity times, coupled with the excellent sound insulation effect, I haven't even met the other neighbor. Only the umbrellas occasionally placed at the elevator entrance can indicate that there are other people living on this floor. I parked my car in the parking lot, and it took me 3 trips to move all the purchased items to the elevator entrance. When I got to my doorstep, it took me more than 10 minutes to sort all the items and put them into my large freezer and refrigerator. Because the community was once locked down due to the epidemic before, I specifically bought a large freezer at this time. It was 8/10 full. 1/3 of it was filled with the ice cream I had stockpiled, and the rest was all frozen chickens, ducks, animal offal, and half a side of pork. These were all sent to me by my mother from my hometown. My parents have contracted a mountain in our hometown. The old couple raises pigs, chickens, and ducks on the mountain for fun, and often sends me frozen products as a result. The stockpile is getting larger and larger. I put the steaks, frozen fish, and frozen shrimp in. Finally, it was 9/10 full. I thought that even if there was a sudden epidemic and the city was locked down again, these meats would be enough for me to eat for 2 months. Ding! While I was stuffing some beverages into the refrigerator, my phone received a text message. I glanced at it with my peripheral vision. It was a red high temperature warning, issued by the Urban Meteorological Bureau. The large number degrees C was clearly displayed on it. Tomorrow, the temperature in this city will reach a new high. Exceeding degrees Celsius. Please try not to go out between a.man.p.mif. There are elderly people or children at home. Degrees Celsius. I couldn't help but curse. I directly grabbed my phone, edited a text message, and went through the process on a way to apply for leave from my leader, and also informed the Human Resources Department in one go. In such hot weather, I don't want to go out and be baked, of course. I want to take as much leave as possible. After calculating the compensatory leave time I had accumulated due to rushing to complete the large project in the past 6 months, plus the weekends, I could probably take about days of leave at one time. Surely, it won't still be this hot after days. The leave application was approved quickly when I came out after taking a shower. OA showed that it had been passed. There were also 2 missed calls. From my mother. I called her back. Hello, Mom. Ching ching. It's very hot where you are. Don't go out unless it's necessary. You alone there. What if you get heat stroke? Also, quickly apply for leave from the company, and don't go to work, you naughty girl. You used to like running around when it was degrees Celsius when you were a child. As soon as the call was connected, my mother bombarded me with a series of greetings. I know, Mom, you and Dad also need to pay attention to preventing heat stroke and cooling down. Don't be reluctant to turn on the air conditioner, okay? I admonished. What air conditioner? Your dad and I are in the mountains. The highest temperature today is only degrees Celsius. We even cover ourselves with a quilt when we sleep at night. You'd better take care of yourself. You had to run so far away. If you had stayed here, it would have been much cooler to live in the mountains directly. My mother started nagging in a bad mood. I let her nag for more than 10 minutes before finally finding an excuse to hang up the phone. This summer was indeed extremely abnormal in terms of heat. I opened a box of ice cream, sat comfortably on the sofa, and turned on the TV while eating. The recent continuous high temperature has led to the death of more than 1,000 people in European countries. The temperature, in some parts of India, has exceeded degrees Celsius. Some experts say that such a temperature is no longer suitable for human habitation. As soon as I turned it on, there were messages about the high temperature around the world. I was grateful that I lived in China, where the per capita air conditioner penetration rate exceeds %. At this time, I still didn't know that in the short few days to come, the continuous high temperature, even higher temperature, would soon show me what it means to be unsuitable for human habitation. 02. During the following 2-day weekend, I delightedly kept the air conditioner running at a constant temperature of 24 degrees Celsius. I woke up naturally after a sound sleep, and upon waking up, I watched dramas and played games at home. When it was time for a meal, I cooked a dish and stewed a soup for myself, comfortably enjoying a vacation right at home. This went on until Monday. I was soundly asleep when suddenly I was awakened by the ringing of my mobile phone. When I answered it, it was my colleague, Huangling Qingqing. Why didn't you come to work today? I've applied for leave, a long leave. You won't see me until next month. I let out a long yawn. Upon hearing this, Huangling's tone was filled with shock. Is that for real? The HR department said you've used up all your annual leave and compensatory leave, and I couldn't believe it. Is there something wrong at home? She was the colleague I had the best relationship with in the company. I quickly sat up. It's nothing. It's just that it's too hot, and I don't want to go to work. I want to take a rest. Don't worry about it. Sister, you're not coming to work just because it's hot? Are you crazy? It's not the end of the world. The high temperature apocalypse. Haven't you heard of it? I chuckled. TSK, I really envy you for being able to take leave now. I still have some final work to do for my project. Otherwise, I'd also like to take leave. You know what? On my way to the company this morning, the back of my hand got sunburned. Huangling complained to me for a while, and then hung up the phone. I glanced at the time. It was 8:45 in the morning. Was the sun already this scorching so early? I got out of bed, drew open the blackout curtains, and opened the window to feel the air. Suddenly, a blast of hot air rushed towards me, and the places within my sight seemed somewhat distorted. Holy cow! I quickly closed the window and drew the curtains. This is outrageous. It's way too hot. In such weather, how are people who need to work outdoors supposed to survive? I checked the weather forecast, which showed 39 degrees Celsius, but soon it automatically refreshed and changed to 40 degrees Celsius, and the temperature predictions for the next few hours showed a continuous upward trend. At 10 o'clock, it would be 41 degrees Celsius. At 11 o'clock, 41 degrees Celsius. At 12 o'clock, 42 degrees Celsius. At 13 o'clock, 43 degrees Celsius. At 14 o'clock, 43 degrees Celsius. Was I going crazy? Or was the weather forecast going crazy? Yesterday's highest temperature was still 40 degrees Celsius. And today it was going to reach 43 degrees Celsius? In a state of trepidation, I simply made myself a breakfast and ate it. Then I cleaned up the garbage and planned to go downstairs to throw it away while the weather wasn't too hot yet. As soon as I opened the door, I happened to meet Xiao Chun from the community property management. He had just knocked on the door of the opposite household. Great, you're here too. Then let's listen together. He turned around and saw me, smiling at me. I smiled back at him, and looked at my neighbor whom I had never met before. It was a man with slightly long hair and dark circles under his eyes. He looked as if he had just woken up. When our eyes met, we nodded at each other. Here's the thing. I'm here to inform you that there's a high probability of a power outage in the next few days, due to the high temperature. If there is a power outage, don't panic. Our community has solar power supply equipment. It will take 10 minutes to start up after the power outage. Also, during this period, please try to save electricity as much as possible. If you use the air conditioner, please set the temperature above 26 degrees Celsius, Xiaochen said. Will there be a water outage? I asked. We're not sure for now, but it's still recommended that you store some drinking water at home. This high temperature is really abnormal, and we in the property management can't guarantee it for the time being. We're really sorry about that. Here's the flyer. Please take a look. Got it. The man opposite nodded, took the flyer, and closed the door directly. It seemed he wasn't a very polite person. Xiaochen wasn't offended either. He handed the flyer to me. I asked him if he wanted to come in and take a rest, but he refused, saying that he had to quickly inform the homeowners in this building to face as soon as possible to avoid anyone missing the notice. You're going to throw out the garbage, right? Just give it to me. I'll throw it for you. He even took the garbage from my hand. The property management fee of 20 yuan per square meter really wasn't paid in vain. The community supporting facilities were quite advanced, and the service attitude was excellent, thoughtful, and considerate. After seeing him off, I retreated into the house, and saw that the communication screen by the door indeed displayed the words indicating a possible power outage, due to the high temperature, which was exactly the same as the flyer in my hand. However, if Xiaochen hadn't come to knock on the door, I probably wouldn't have noticed it. Ee-oh-ee, oh-ee, oh-ee, oh-oh. There were noticeably more sounds of ambulances and fire trucks passing by today. I nestled on the sofa, blowing the air conditioner and eating ice cream, and I even felt a bit guilty. The news on the internet began to scroll, broadcasting various disasters caused by the extreme high temperature weather in different places. Among them, one video was pushed to the top. It was a reporter. For the first 30 seconds, he didn't wear a hat and persisted in doing a live broadcast outdoors under the blazing sun. At the 31st second, smoke suddenly emerged from the top of his head, and then it actually caught fire. Fortunately, the staff beside him promptly poured mineral water to put out the fire. Thank you for your concern. I'm okay. In high temperature weather, please don't apply too much hair wax to your hair, and also don't work under the sun for too long. This was the top pinned comment. I wanted to laugh when I saw it, but I couldn't quite manage it. Ainian felt that something big was going to go wrong in the world. 43 degrees Celsius, 44 degrees Celsius, 45 degrees Celsius. Sure enough, in the following days, the temperature continued to rise. A week later, the highest daytime temperature reached an astonishing 46 degrees Celsius, and even at midnight, the temperature was as high as 39 degrees Celsius. All outdoor work had been completely suspended. Almost all companies had switched to online work. Only a few staff members whose work couldn't be halted were still persevering on the front line. Yesterday's top news was about a mother who fell on the road while holding her child with a high fever, and the skin in contact with the ground was all scalded. Today's top news had become about a heroic electrician who climbed and worked under the scorching sun, suffered from heat stroke, and sacrificed heroically. Countless people silently offered white flowers on the internet. No one used that emoji of lighting candles, because it was simply too hot. As the high temperature persisted, there were problems with the power supply in many places, and there were more and more news about people dying from the heat. The high-level authorities initiated emergency Bishan measures, opening all the air-conditioned auditoriums, gyms and schools and shopping malls as 24-hour shelters for people without air conditioners to escape the heat. However, the number of people who died from the heat still continued to rise along with the temperature. Hospitals were overcrowded, fires occurred frequently in cities and villages, and there were videos of people seeking help everywhere on the internet. Since I took the leave, I had talked to my parents on the phone almost every day to learn about the situation on their side. Although they were in the mountains, the highest temperature in the recent few days had also reached 40 degrees Celsius. When I talked to them today, I learned that they had finally turned on the air conditioner. Ching, don't worry about us. You must remember to turn on the air conditioner. Don't be afraid of wasting electricity. Your parents have money. Now it was them who were persuading me to turn it on. I've already turned it on. Don't worry, I said. Do you have enough food? Do you want us to send you some? We don't know when this natural disaster will end. My mother's voice sounded worried. I have enough. Didn't I tell you? I just bought a lot of food before I took the leave. It's enough for me to eat for 3 months. Moreover, the property management delivers ingredients every day. After the call ended, I specifically took photos of the stock in my 2 refrigerators again, and sent them to my parents. Due to this severe natural disaster, I hadn't had much of an appetite in the past few days, and hadn't eaten much. Only some fruits and vegetables were missing from the 2 refrigerators. After rearranging them, they still looked full. Buzz. Just after I took the photos and sent them, the TV suddenly went black, and the whole room fell silent. I pressed the light switch a few times, and was sure that there was probably a power outage. Fortunately, thanks to Xiaochen's reminder before, I wasn't very worried. After the air conditioner stopped working, the temperature around me rose quickly, and the air became stuffy. Every breath I took was much hotter. A few minutes later, I was already sweating profusely. I quickly took an ice cream from the refrigerator, sat on the ground, and ate it while waiting for the power to be restored. After I finished the ice cream, the power still hadn't come back. I ate another one. The power still didn't come back. I became a bit restless. Just as I was about to use the intercom, to call the property management to ask about the situation. Ding dong, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw the man from the opposite door. He still had those dark circles under his eyes, and was sweating profusely. He was standing at my door. 03, should I open the door? I hesitated for a moment, fastened the security chain, and opened the door a crack. What's the matter? I asked. The man motioned to the thing in his hand. I took a closer look and saw that it was an ice cream. I just called the property management. They said it will be another half an hour. You must be really hot, right? Have an ice cream to cool down. I have a lot more. If you're hot, you can come and get some from me. His voice was actually quite pleasant. Thank you, but no need, I said. Perhaps he could see my defensiveness. He didn't say anything more. He just put the ice cream on the shelf at my door and turned to leave. I kept the door open a crack and watched as he walked past the 2 security doors, returned to his house, and closed the door. Maybe he's really a nice guy? At this time, ice cream was a scarce item. I opened the door, took the ice cream in, thought for a moment, put 2 layers of plastic bags over it, and then put it in my freezer. I also took out another ice cream and started eating it. After eating this one, I won't open the freezer anymore to prevent the cold air inside from escaping. It's really hot. About 20 minutes later, I was lying on the ground in a sprawled position, panting like a dog. It was hot, but I didn't dare to open the window, fearing that it would be even hotter outside. It was a high temperature of 46 degrees Celsius. No. 1538 update successful. I widened my eyes and looked at the newly refreshed temperature display on my phone, almost letting out a cry of surprise. It was 48 degrees Celsius. It was already 48 degrees Celsius. This couldn't be true. I must have been seeing things. I pressed my finger on the screen and scrolled down to refresh it again. 1539 update successful. 1539 update successful. 1539 update successful. But after refreshing it 3 times in a row, it still showed 48 degrees Celsius. Then the interface suddenly turned into a 404 error. I went back and wanted to check the weather again, but it prompted that the mobile phone network was disconnected, and a red exclamation mark appeared on the interface. I turned the phone off and on again, and it directly showed that there was no signal for both numbers. It wasn't just the network that was disconnected. Even the mobile phone had lost its communication function. The temperature around me was constantly rising. I felt that the temperature in the room was about to reach 40 degrees Celsius. Every breath I took was hot air, making me feel like I was about to suffocate. I rushed to the door, grabbed the intercom on the door, and pressed the button to call the property management. Beep, beep, beep. No one answered for a long time. Had even the property management stopped functioning? The heat and fear instantly filled my heart. The room was filled with the sound of my inhaling and exhaling. The sound insulation was so good that I couldn't hear any other sounds except my own. It was as if I was on a lonely island. Calm down, Su Qingqing. You need to calm down. I talked to myself, walked up to the freezer, pulled it open, and took out a duck from inside and hugged it in my arms. This duck had been frozen in the freezer for several months. It was as hard as a rock from the inside out, which made me feel a bit cooler, and also helped me calm down. I began to analyze what to do if I got heatstroke while being alone in the room. Heatstroke. For heatstroke I should write Huaxiang Jingqi Shui, a traditional Chinese medicine for heatstroke. I opened the medicine cabinet at home, opened a bottle of Huaxiang Jingqi Shui, and drank it in one gulp. Then I took out the essential balm and applied it to my forehead, neck, armpits, and other places to dissipate heat. After that, I went into the room and took a blanket, soaked it directly in a large basin of water in the bathroom, and draped it over myself. I had done everything I could. While quickly eating an ice cream, I kept looking at the clock on the wall, regretting not buying an electronic clock with a thermometer, so that I couldn't know the current temperature in the room. But even if I knew the temperature, there wasn't much I could do about it. Beep beep beep. I don't know how much time had passed. Maybe a few minutes, maybe half an hour. Suddenly the intercom at the door rang. I turned my head abruptly and almost twisted my neck. Dear, hi all homeowners, please take note. Our city is facing a high temperature disaster. The solar panels in the community have been damaged by the sun, and the power cannot be restored for now. You can temporarily go to the underground parking lot to escape the heat. Currently, the temperature in the parking lot on the first underground floor is 39.8 degrees Celsius, and that on the second underground floor is 38 degrees Celsius. Right, the underground parking lot. Why didn't I think of that? I was about to open the door and rush out, but then I thought about it and took a backpack. I replaced the duck in it with another frozen one, put all the remaining essential balm and Huaxiang Jingqi Shui in it, stuffed in 2 breads and 3 bottles of mineral water, soaked the blanket again, and then opened the door. When I opened the door opposite also opened at the same time. My neighbor came out with a large backpack on his back. What a coincidence. I had never met this neighbor before, but since the high temperature disaster started, I met him every time I opened the door. Follow me. My car's fuel tank is full, he said directly as he walked up to me. I instinctively took a step back. Since my divorce, I had been very wary of men around me and always habitually felt afraid. I'm sorry. I have no ill intentions. You should also have a car. We can turn on the air conditioner in the car. If the fuel in my car runs out, we can go to your car. This way, we can last a bit longer. He looked into my eyes, seemingly a bit at a loss. There was a window in the corridor, and the sunlight shone in, making it even hotter than in the room. The air I inhaled was somewhat scorching, and even my eyes were a bit blurry. I took a few breaths, grabbed the car key by the door and closed the door. Okay, let's go. In the face of such a natural disaster, no one can stay out of it. We can only survive by sticking together. So I had to agree with him. My neighbor walked in front of me and opened the door to the stairwell. Instantly a rush of cool air came. On the 16th floor, usually no one takes the stairs. However, due to the lack of ventilation on a regular basis, the stairwell, which was normally extremely stuffy, was surprisingly cool. Presumably, the basement must be even more comfortable. Driven by the longing for cooling down, I quickened my pace. Soon, I heard the sound of footsteps echoing in the stairwell, one after another, accompanied by curses and the crying of children. It was likely that other people in the building, having heard the notice from the property management, had all come out. When passing the 5th floor, I saw an old man with gray hair, sitting on the ground leaning against the wall, showing no reaction even when people passed by. Grandpa, are you okay? I stopped and asked. My legs and feet aren't good. I can't walk anymore. You don't have to bother about me. Just go ahead, the old man said. I hesitated for a moment. My neighbor, who was walking in front of me, had already reached the corner. Upon hearing my conversation with the old man, he turned back. How about the two of us help you walk? No need. Just get lost. The old man's eyes flashed with a fierce light. I was startled and quickly walked down. When I reached the 3rd floor, my neighbor caught up with me, pulling the zipper of his backpack as he walked. I left him a bottle of water. Life and death are in the hands of fate, he said in a low voice that trembled slightly. 04. On the 1st underground floor, my neighbor took out the car key, and an SUV that was very close to the stairwell flashed twice. He took 3 steps at a time and rushed over. He yanked open the door of the driver's seat, threw his backpack onto the passenger seat, and started the car. Buzz. With the sound of starting up, the car shook slightly, and a smell of gasoline rushed towards me, making my stomach churn. Actually, I'm someone who gets carsick very easily. But at this moment, I had no choice but to get in the car, so I crawled into the back seat. The back seat of this SUV had a large space, but the air quality was extremely poor, and there was also a sour smell of fermented fruits filling the air. I was already dizzy from the smell of gasoline, and with this strange smell added, I almost vomited. I'm sorry, there was a bag of fruits in the car that I forgot to take out, he said softly in the front, perhaps seeing my contorted face in the rearview mirror. I searched around and indeed found a bag of rotten fruits. After hesitating for a moment, I didn't throw the fruits out. Instead, I tied the plastic bag tightly and threw it into the corner. I didn't have much food with me, so I had to prepare for the worst. With the air conditioner on, the temperature inside the car gradually dropped. Although it was still very stuffy, at least it wasn't as hot as before. People passed by one after another and got into the nearby cars one after another. Apparently, they had all thought of the same thing as my neighbor. When people who entered the 1st underground floor saw that the cars were all occupied, some turned around and walked back, presumably to get their car keys, and some hesitated for a moment, and then headed towards the 2nd underground floor. I saw several property management staff members running hurriedly through the stairwell, each holding a box of mineral water in their hands. What a conscientious property management! I exclaimed. Let me introduce myself. My name is Lu Zhou. What's your name? My neighbor in the driver's seat in the front said. My name is Fang Qing. I'm sorry for getting your car wet. I hesitated and didn't tell my real name. I folded the wet blanket and placed it on my lap. It doesn't matter. After he said that, neither of us spoke again. We quietly felt the temperature cooling down in the car. I wonder when this natural disaster will end. The air was as stuffy as the atmosphere, and the buzzing sound of the car air conditioner running was the only sound inside the car. After a while, he turned on the car radio. ZZZ, it is reported that the extreme high temperature weather will continue for another week. Please try not to go out, residents. As soon as it was turned on, unfortunate news came out. I sighed and silently thought about whether the water and bread in my backpack were enough to eat. I should have known better than to bring that duck. I could have brought more food and water instead. In recent days, the temperature in Greenland has been approaching 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and the glaciers are melting. ZZZ, global extreme weather. Half of the Earth turns red. ZZZ, scientists predict that in the next 10 years, the highest temperature may still rise. Lu Zhou switched several channels, and then silently turned it off. There was no point in continuing to listen. The news was getting more and more anxiety-provoking. It's all your fault. I said we should take Xiaoming back to my hometown in the mountains for the summer vacation. But you just wouldn't let me. Now look at us. We're almost like refugees. A complaining voice came from outside the window. A couple with a little girl passed by our car and got into the car next to us. Because this SUV was parked close to the stairwell, more and more people passed by our car. There were old people and children, mostly families, all in a hurry. I watched them in silence. The light above my head flashed a few times, and my heart skipped a beat. The elevators were all out of service. Where did the power for the lights in the parking lot come from? It seemed that I didn't hear the sound of the air handling unit. Only the lights were on. While I was thinking about this, Lu Zhou in the driver's seat suddenly banged on the steering wheel and cursed. I instantly stiffened all over, and some fragments from the past involuntarily flashed through my mind. My ex-husband's fists were covered in my blood. Fang Qing, I was wrong. We have to go back upstairs. Lu Zhou turned to look at me, his expression startled. Are you okay? He asked cautiously. I wiped the sweat off my face and tried my best to calm myself down. I'm fine. What did you just say? Have some water first. He handed me a bottle of water. I didn't take it. Forcibly suppressing the urge to step back, I took out a bottle of mineral water from my own bag and drank half of it. My heart rate gradually eased. Fong Qing, we shouldn't have come downstairs. There are too many cars. It might get extremely hot here later, and it's also very dangerous. Lu Zhou said as he put the water back into his bag. You mean? I also realized something and quickly looked around. Basically, everyone who had a car had thought of using the car to escape the heat. 8 out of 10 cars around had already been started, and there were still people getting into the empty cars one after another. The exhaust fumes from the cars may cause the temperature to rise, and the carbon monoxide content will also increase. We have to go back upstairs. Lu Zhou looked at me. I rubbed my temples. It's easier to go downstairs than to go upstairs, not to mention going up to the 16th floor. This is really a disaster. If you don't want to go back upstairs, you can stay in my car. As long as you don't get out of the car, you should be safe. But, Lu Zhou hesitated. Once the car runs out of fuel, I still have to get out of the car to get some air. By then, I will not only have to endure the high temperature baking, but may also be poisoned directly by inhaling carbon monoxide. I'll go upstairs. After weighing the options, I made a decision. The two of us in perfect Wuchi checked our backpacks, put them on, and opened the car door. In the car next door, the little girl was leaning against the car window looking at me. I couldn't help but knock on their car window. What are you doing? The wife picked up the child and gave me a fierce look. There are too many cars in here. The carbon monoxide may exceed the standard. I suggest you go home, I said loudly. Whether she understood me or not, I didn't care. I turned around and followed Lu Zhou's footsteps. They were the closest people, and I had fulfilled my obligation to remind them. There was no need to be a saint. When we climbed to the 5th floor, the old man was already gone, and there was an empty mineral water bottle on the ground. As we went further up, the stairs were full of people going downstairs. When they saw us going up, many people cast puzzled looks at us. However, there were also some people going up like us, taking a rest on different floors. They must have thought of the same situation. On the 10th floor, we ran into an acquaintance, Xiao Chun from the property management. Are you going back to get something? He came down from upstairs panting heavily, carrying a backpack on his back just like us. When he saw us, he looked surprised. We're going home and don't plan to come down anymore. You'd better inform those people in the parking lot to be careful of carbon monoxide poisoning due to excessive concentration. Lu Zhou replied to him. Xiao Chen's expression froze. He mumbled something softly. Suddenly, he leaned close to Lu Zhou's ear and whispered a few words to him. I saw Lu Zhou's expression change from confusion to surprise, and then to shock. Are you serious? Pray for your own good fortune. Xiao Chen patted Lu Zhou's shoulder and left in a hurry downstairs. What did he say? I asked. Lu Zhou turned around, his face looking serious, and large beads of sweat were falling from his forehead. Fong Qing, I don't know if my judgment is right or not. You make the choice. Go home upstairs, or go back to the car downstairs. Xiao Chen just said that the property management has a thermometer showing that it's not 48 degrees outside now. It's 56 degrees. 05. What does 56 degrees mean? The novel coronavirus can only survive for 30 minutes at 56 degrees. What about humans? I was gasping for breath, and so was he. The small space was filled with the sound of our heavy breathing. The temperature around us was rising. Inhaling and exhaling were like being in a sauna, with waves of heat and waves of discomfort. 56 degrees? 56 degrees. 56. Hasn't it been 55 degrees in India for several years? I couldn't help but retort. This number was really astonishing. I suspected that Lu Zhou had misheard. Maybe it was 46 degrees or something. 46 degrees was already terrifying enough. How could it rise to 56 degrees in such a short time? Lu Zhou's expression was grim. I'm asking you, do you want to go home or go to the car? Do you want to go home or go to the car? I threw the question back at him, leaning on my knees and gasping for breath. The high temperature had made the air thin, and we had climbed so many floors. I felt as if my whole body was about to catch fire. Lu Zhou didn't answer. He opened a bottle of water, drank half of it, and poured the other half over his head. His face was red from the heat, and the dark circles under his eyes had disappeared. I took out the last bottle of water left in my bag, and also drank half of it like him, pouring the remaining half over my head. The mineral water was closely attached to the duct that was 80% thawed, giving off a trace of coolness, which made me sober up a bit. I tried to think with the few brain cells that were left after being heated. It was around 4:30 in the afternoon, and it was at least another hour and a half before the sun set. Without an air conditioner, the temperature difference between the indoor and outdoor areas was usually 3 to 5 degrees. That is to say, if I went home, I was very likely to be roasted by a high temperature of over 50 degrees. But if I went back to the car, bang, while I was still hesitating, I suddenly heard a clear sound of glass bursting. It was the high temperature that had caused the metal window frame to deform, resulting in the glass shattering. An even more scorching breath suddenly rushed in. We have to go. I choose to go home. It's up to you, Lu Zhou said anxiously, and took the lead in rushing up the stairs. Without thinking, I followed closely behind. The impact of the high temperature was more than we had imagined. As soon as we moved, we heard a continuous sound of glass bursting. Some of the glass even fell off the window frame and shattered all over the ground. On the 13th floor, I was already as tired as a dog, sticking out my tongue and gasping for breath. holding onto the scalding railing. My legs were so stiff that I couldn't move. Lu Zhou turned back and pulled me, dragging me up the stairs. It was hot. The high temperature seemed to have a physical form, turning into a fire dragon that chased us closely behind, occasionally spewing out dragon's breath of thousands of degrees, ready to burn people to ashes at any moment. On the 14th floor. On the 15th floor. It was too hot. As soon as the sweat on my body fell to the ground, it was evaporated. On the last floor I almost crawled up. When my palm touched the ground, it was burned painfully, and I even felt my throat hurt when I wanted to scream. We have to get in quickly. Lu Zhou fumbled around for the key, but couldn't find it. I grabbed the hem of his clothes from behind and pointed to my door. The password is 0726. Ding. Welcome home. Fortunately, the password lock hadn't been damaged by the heat. We stumbled in and greedily breathed in the remaining trace of coolness inside. What a huge freezer. I heard Lu Zhou's voice of surprise. It was the right choice to come home. I had stored so much ice. Before fearing a water outage, I had also stored a large amount of water in the bathroom. It should be no problem to get through the remaining more than an hour. A moment later, I was lying in the water in the bathtub, with several chickens floating on the water. Lu Zhou was sitting on the lid of the toilet opposite, soaking his feet in a basin of water together with a duck. There was also a basin placed on his lap, and he was sticking his hand in and holding a duck to cool down. The bathroom was filled with frozen chickens and ducks placed everywhere, creating a somewhat comical scene. However, as long as it worked, that was fine. At least the temperature in the bathroom had dropped to a bearable level. You're really a genius. Did you freeze so much meat in the freezer in case of a zombie outbreak? Lu Zhou teased as he played with the duck in the water. I'd rather there be a zombie outbreak. That way, at least I could survive at home for a few months without fearing being roasted to death by the heat, I said coldly, looking out the window. This window, perhaps because it was relatively small and in the shade, hadn't been cracked by the heat. Outside, it presented an illusory image of a golden city, which seemed very unreal. If this were a dream, I hoped I could wake up soon. 2 hours later, the sun finally set. The rooftops of the city lost their golden luster, and darkness gradually enveloped the land. More than an hour later, looking out from the window, I could see candles lit on some floors. It seemed that there were still quite a few people stubbornly staying at home. Lu Zhou opened the door and walked out of the bathroom. He took a deep breath and then exhaled slowly. It's finally cooling down. I didn't need him to tell me that, because I actually felt a bit cold while soaking in the water. I stood up from the bathtub, intending to tidy up my disheveled self. But as soon as my feet touched the ground, I suddenly felt a dizzy spell. Oh no. The next second, my eyes closed involuntarily, and I lost consciousness. When I opened my eyes again, the first thing I saw was the ceiling fan light in the living room. I was lying on the floor of the living room, and there was a hint of light in the sky outside. Had I been unconscious for the whole night? Are you awake? Lu Zhou handed me a bottle of beverage. There's 1 piece of good news and 3 pieces of bad news. Which one do you want to hear first? The good one. I was startled by my hoarse voice, and quickly took a sip of the beverage. Lu Zhou nodded. The good news is that you're still alive. And the bad news? I asked, taking another sip. The beverage was already at room temperature, but it was very palatable. After drinking some of it, I felt energized all over. I sat up and moved my hands and feet, feeling a sense of having survived a disaster. The bad news is that the water supply was cut off in the middle of the night yesterday. The electricity still hasn't come back, and there's no signal on the mobile phone either. It was a triple failure. I fell silent. If today was as hot as yesterday, it would probably be even more difficult to get through. Oh, and I'll tell you another piece of good news. The radio function of the mobile phone still works. We can still listen to the news before the battery runs out. I still have 1% battery left. Lu Zhou smiled and turned on the radio. ZZZ, this is the voice of China, the voice of China, the voice of China. All citizens are requested to stay at home during the day as much as possible. Pay attention to replenishing water, and do not go out. Wait for rescue. This high-temperature disaster has affected 9 provinces across the country, and the highest temperature may reach 60 degrees. ZZZ. The battery of the mobile phone ran out, and it turned off automatically. I looked at him numbly. The highest temperature reaching 60 degrees? This number made me doubt that I was living on Huayanshan, the flaming mountain. Do you have a power bank, dear? Lu Zhou still had the mood to joke. I walked into the study, took out 2 power banks from the drawer. Just as I was about to take them out to give to him, a flash of inspiration suddenly struck me. Power bank charging. Lu Zhou, come in and give me a hand. I dragged a chair and placed it under the bookcase. What are you going to do? Take down the package at the very bottom on the top shelf, the square one. This one. It's a bit heavy. Be careful. Lu Zhou climbed onto the chair and took down the package. Yes, this is it. My heart leaped with joy. I took the box and carefully placed it on the ground. What is this? Lu Zhou asked. A household solar charging device. What? A household solar charging device. I bought it before and haven't opened it yet. 06. I truly admired myself. In the past few years, due to my promotion to the company's management, I had earned a lot of money. So I just bought whatever I was curious about or thought might be useful. If I remembered correctly, I bought this solar charging device a year and a half ago. At that time, I originally planned to buy a recreational vehicle and go on a trip, but I was discouraged by the lack of parking spaces. However, I had already bought a lot of outdoor survival equipment in advance. Sister, you're so amazing. You actually have such a great thing. Lu Zhou also got excited after hearing this, and quickly helped to unpack it, and adjust it according to the instructions. Half an hour later, before the sun rose, we placed the solar charging panel on the bay window in the bedroom, drew the curtains of the bay window, and dragged a freezer into the bedroom. We also placed small fans all around. The sun slowly rose, and the golden light once again covered the land, and the temperature started to rise. Lu Zhou glanced at me. I nodded. He resolutely pressed the switch. Buzz. The sound of the electrical appliances starting up, and the sound of the small fans starting to work were like the sounds of nature. When I bought the freezer, considering that I didn't need super low freezing, I bought a model with a relatively low power. If the solar charging panel worked well, it should not be a problem to maintain its function. Now the freezer was filled with beverages and mineral water. Some were mine, and some were moved here by Lu Zhou from his home. He said he was a game streamer and often didn't go out for 10 days or half a month, so he also had a lot of supplies at home. We took an inventory of all the food. All the ice cream had melted. Since it was too difficult to deal with, I threw it away directly. Originally, there were a total of 6 chickens, 3 ducks, half a pig, about 5 pounds of steaks, 2 fish, and a bag of shrimp in the freezer. These meats were very difficult to keep fresh in such weather, so we simply spread them all out on the balcony floor, while they hadn't started to rot yet, hoping that the high temperature today could bake them into dried meat for easier storage. The leafy vegetables, after being exposed to the high temperature last night, were mostly spoiled and gave off an unpleasant smell. We didn't dare to eat them. If we got diarrhea, it would be a great loss. So we had to throw them on the balcony as well, sprinkled some salt on them, and tried to dry them into dried vegetables. As for the eggs, I simply wrapped them in clothes and placed them on the balcony shelf, hoping they could be cooked by the sun. When taking an inventory of the snacks, I found that 2 bags of potato chips and other snacks had burst and were baked hard and crispy. I took a bag and collected all of them on the ground. The remaining snacks in intact packaging, together with other biscuits and bread, were all moved into the bedroom. The canned food and rice were in the kitchen cabinets, and were left untouched for now. Then there was a bag of apples. Since they were still fresh, we decided to eat them immediately. These would be our food for the next 2 days. Sister, you're really a genius. You actually have so much food hidden at home, Lu Zhou exclaimed. Shiver. I got goosebumps all over. Don't call me sister. Just call me by my name. Sister Ching Ching. Shut up, or I'll kick you out. I walked out of the bedroom. While the temperature wasn't too high yet, I went to the study and carried a few books. I hadn't opened these books since I bought them. Now, since we couldn't go out due to the disaster weather, and there was no electricity to play with our mobile phones, it was just the right time to read them. Lu Zhou was sensible enough not to bother me anymore. He opened the door and went out, and when he came back, he also brought a few books. He pulled a chair, and sat down in the corner by himself. As time passed, the temperature gradually rose. We opened the freezer a crack, and arranged the small fans to oscillate from side to side. When the temperature rose a bit more, we opened the freezer wider to maintain the indoor temperature within the bearable range for the human body. Then we drank water to replenish the moisture lost by our bodies. Even with this simple cooling device, by the afternoon, both of us were sweating profusely even while sitting, and our books were also soaked with sweat. The saying, "A calm mind brings natural coolness," simply didn't exist in the face of absolute high temperature. Fortunately, we managed to get through the day. The highest temperature today is 58 degrees, and the high temperature weather will continue. In the evening, we charged our mobile phones and turned on the radio to listen. We both felt a bit apprehensive. Without that life-saving solar charging device, I really didn't know how Lu Zhou and I would have survived. After it got dark, we used the flashlights on our mobile phones for illumination and collected all the meat on the balcony. When we went out, we almost slipped because the floor was covered with the oil that had been roasted out of the meat. The aroma of the meat was so strong that it couldn't be masked. I was originally a bit worried that it might attract people with ulterior motives. I had been cautious for several days and couldn't sleep soundly at night. Fortunately, no one else showed up. Lu Zhou went back to his own home to sleep every night, and only came over during the day. From the next day on, he brought over a large number of board games. Together with the existing books, they helped us pass a lot of time. We ate the sun-dried roasted meat every day, occasionally opened a bag of snacks, and accompanied by the beverages in the freezer. After getting used to the high temperature, for a moment, I actually felt that time was passing peacefully, but I knew that these were all illusions, because with each passing day of the high temperature, the number of candles lit in the opposite building at night would decrease by a few households. 1 week later, at night, I was sleeping and dreaming that I was guessing intelligence with people from a rival company. The opponent won, but I didn't feel sorry. When I saw them setting off firecrackers to celebrate, I even clapped beside them. Bang! The explosion woke me up. I sat up abruptly and looked out the window. Only then did I realize that it wasn't firecrackers. Instead, there was an explosion in a place in the opposite building, and the flames split the night. Recently, I had been hearing the sound of explosions, and had also seen flames and black smoke at night, but they were all far away from me. This was the closest one so far. Bang! There was another loud noise, and the glass vibrated. I let out a scream, got out of bed and rushed out. When I came to my senses, I was already hugging Lu Zhou's waist and shaking continuously. "It's okay. It's the opposite building. The fire won't reach us here," he said stiffly as he reached out to touch my hair. I shuddered and pushed him away abruptly. "Fangting, Don't come near me. I'm fine, I'm fine. I gritted my teeth and retreated to the bedroom, quickly closing the door behind me. The fire in the opposite building had completely ignited. It seemed that I could hear the crackling sound and the screams. Fangqing, are you okay? Lu Zhou knocked on the door twice. I squatted down, hugged my knees with both hands and covered my ears. The sound of pounding on the door that lingered in my mind intertwined with Lu Zhou's knocking, assaulting me like raindrops. Ah, I'm fine. You go back, I screamed. Fangqing, I'm right outside. Don't worry. Nothing will happen. Calm down. Lu Zhou seemed to say this, and the knocking on the door stopped. I couldn't hear clearly. I just squatted there, looking at the growing flames in the opposite building through the window. Some people rushed out of the flames and fell straight down like birds without wings. Some people appeared at the window, waving a flashlight desperately for help. Others poured water down from the upper floors, but it was useless. The flames were still getting bigger and bigger. They grew larger and larger, until they enveloped the entire building. The flames shot up into the sky. Ironically, the opposite building had turned into a blazing inferno. But here, just less than 100 meters away, the temperature hadn't risen much. God, if this is really the end of the world, please let me be freed soon. Just like this, hugging my knees, I stayed awake with my eyes open until dawn. The fire burned for the whole night, and hadn't completely gone out by dawn. Knock, knock, knock. The bedroom door was knocked. I fell to the ground all of a sudden, only to find that my legs had gone numb, and I had no feeling in them. Fangqing, it's me. It's Lu Zhou. Look outside. Is it raining? He said. 07. It was said to be rain, but actually, it was just a few scattered raindrops. If one didn't look carefully, one wouldn't even notice it was rain because it was almost evaporated in mid-air. Half an hour later, I looked down from the balcony. The ground was still golden. The sun came out, and the temperature rose as usual. It's artificial rainfall in the neighboring city, and we got a little bit of it. Lu Zhou stood behind me holding a mobile phone. Although such a small amount of rain was of little use, the fact that there was artificial rainfall indicated that the higher authorities hadn't stopped functioning. As long as we persevered, we would definitely be able to wait for the day when the temperature dropped. We couldn't lose our faith in survival. I brought 2 more boxes of water. The high temperature weather won't last long. It should pass soon, Lu Zhou said as he carried the water to the bedroom door. Seeing that I had no objections, he carried the water in. His cautious look was completely obvious. What a pity. I might have scared him last night. There were several places in the opposite building that kept reigniting, with thick smoke billowing, covering part of the sky. The sunlight pierced through the thick black fog, casting a shower of vividly red rays that resembled the tips of needles, encircled by a ring of orange light, exuding an ominous and menacing aura. Confronted with such a scene, both of us were rather distracted. When playing poker, we would forget what cards had just been played, and eventually, we simply gave up the game, and each picked up a book to read. During this time, I went to the restroom and discovered that the water in the bathtub, which we had been using to flush the toilet, was almost depleted. The wash basins and buckets were all completely empty. Over the past few days, in an effort to conserve water, we had in a tacit agreement, only flushed the toilet when having a bowel movement. When it came to bathing, we would merely use a damp towel to wipe our bodies briefly. However, even with these measures, the passage of time, combined with the high temperature and rapid evaporation, had taken its toll. There isn't much water left for flushing the toilet. Let's flush it just once a day from now on, I proposed to Lu Zhou as I emerged from the restroom. Upon hearing this, Lu Zhou gave a bitter smile but didn't decline. We both understood that this was a decision made out of sheer necessity. Fortunately, 3 days later, in the middle of the night, we were finally greeted by a rainfall. It was another instance of artificial rainfall, but this time, it occurred right above our city, and the rain in the suburbs was quite substantial as well. The sound of the raindrops pounding against the windows jolted me awake instantly, and Lu Zhou also knocked on the door, his excitement palpable. The two of us placed all the containers we could find for collecting rainwater on the balcony, striving to preserve as much water as possible. We also took out towels, and seized the opportunity to take a bath, and wash our hair. Lu Zhou promptly removed his upper garment, revealing his youthful physique. His muscles were evenly proportioned, albeit a bit on the slender side. He cheered joyfully in the rain. Disregarding any sense of modesty, I turned my back to Lu Zhou, and let the rain wash away the stickiness on my body, relishing the sensation of the raindrops hitting my face. It was an incredibly refreshing experience. I could hear the sounds of happy laughter emanating from both upstairs and downstairs, clearly indicating that there were still many people persevering in this building. Half an hour later, the rain ceased. It had arrived swiftly and departed just as quickly. The buckets were filled with less than 1/3 of water, but the rainfall had brought with it an ample amount of coolness and hope. In celebration of this, Lu Zhou and I opened 2 cans of canned yellow peaches, treating it as a reward for ourselves. We still had a substantial amount of food left. The high temperature naturally had an impact on our appetites. Up to now, we hadn't touched the half a pig that we had dried by roasting, and we had only consumed a few ducks and chickens. There had never been a shortage of drinking water and beverages. The beverages that I had stockpiled from the supermarket, before the disaster, hadn't even been fully consumed yet. Just hold on a bit longer, and we will surely pull through. Ding ding ding. Just after changing into clean clothes, yet another piece of good news arrived. The mobile phone signal had been restored. A multitude of text messages flooded in at once. In order not to miss any news from the outside world, Even when there had been no signal previously, we had, in a tacit understanding, charged our mobile phones fully every day. I picked up my phone and took a brief glance at the text messages. Most of them were safety reminders and high-temperature notifications, while some were messages regarding shelters issued by the higher authorities. Hello, Mom. Lu Zhou had already answered a call from his family on the side. Oh no, the unfilial daughter, was lagging behind. I quickly dialed my mother's number, only to be prompted that her phone was turned off. Was the battery dead? I then dialed the landline number at home. Beep, beep, beep. There was a rapid busy signal. How could this be? I found my father's mobile phone number and dialed it, but still, I couldn't get through. After some thought, I also dug out the numbers of my maternal uncle and third uncle, and started calling each of my relatives one by one. I'm fine here. Everything is okay. I have enough water to drink and enough food to eat. You must take good care of yourselves. Don't. Lu Zhou was speaking on the phone. When he turned towards me, his voice paused for a moment. Mom, in any case, don't run around until the temperature drops. Follow the instructions of the higher authorities. I'll come back to visit you as soon as the weather returns to normal. My friend needs to use my phone to call his or her family, so I'll hang up now. He said a few more words, hung up the phone, and handed it to me. Try mine. I didn't decline. I took it and first entered my mother's phone number, which I knew by heart. The phone was turned off. It was still turned off. And still turned off. Maybe there's a power outage in their area. Lu Zhou comforted me upon seeing that I kept dialing various numbers without getting through. They are already in their 60s. I clutched the two mobile phones and continued making calls. Finally, just when I was on the verge of losing hope, a cousin whom I hadn't been in touch with for many years in my phone book answered the call. Hello. Hello, this is Qingqing. Huh, which Qing? Cousin, I'm Su Qingqing, the daughter of your third aunt. Do you know how my mom is doing? I'm alone in a foreign place and can't get in touch with them. I tried my best to speak calmly. Oh, it's you. I don't know. Maybe you can call the shelter and ask. This cousin was quite helpful and immediately sent me a list of phone numbers of the local shelters. I promptly started dialing, but after checking 3 of them, I still couldn't find my parents' names. Just as I was about to continue checking, a standard female voice came from the phone. Hello, the number you have dialed is out of service area. Please try again later. I had a premonition that something was seriously wrong. I continued dialing the next number, and it gave the same prompt. When I checked the mobile phone signal again, it had indeed dropped back to 0 bars. The signal was lost again. Hey, don't cry. Lu Zhou, at a loss, handed me a tissue. Only then did I realize that I was already in tears. I can't get in touch with them. They're old. What should I do in such hot weather? Although the mountains were much cooler than the city, in the face of such extreme heat, the mountains couldn't possibly be spared. Coupled with the power outage and the loss of signal, I was truly worried that something might happen to them. It'll be okay. They must be fine. My parents are fine. They're in the shelter, where they can enjoy air conditioning, have food to eat, and water to drink. They're much better off than we are. Lu Zhou said as he handed me several more tissues. I took them and buried my face in the tissues, sobbing uncontrollably. I hadn't cried during all these arduous days, nor had I cried when I was frightened by the fire in the opposite building. But when I found out that I couldn't get in touch with my parents who were thousands of miles away, I couldn't hold back my tears. I regretted being so willful and running away to live in a place so far away from them, only visiting them once a year. If I could turn back time, I would definitely stay by their side and never leave. A pair of arms, slightly stiff yet warm, gently encircled me from the side. I flinched slightly, and my body trembled a bit. Don't be afraid. It's me. Don't be afraid. I won't hurt you. Your parents must be in a place where the signal hasn't been restored yet. They must be just as eager to get in touch with you. Since the mobile phone signal has been restored once, it will surely be restored a second time. We need to be patient and wait a bit longer, okay? Although the embrace was somewhat clumsy, and the words of comfort were nothing new, I gradually calmed down at the sound of his voice. Okay, let's wait a bit longer. However, in the following days, there was no more good news. The temperature quickly rose again, even higher than before the artificial rainfall. 08, it was scorching hot. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Counting from the first day I took my leave, 23 days had already passed. During this period, the temperature had almost been on the rise, only dropping slightly on the day of the artificial rainfall, but then it promptly climbed to above 60 degrees. That's right, the Earth seemed on the verge of exploding. Or perhaps it would be more accurate to say that humans were no longer able to survive on the Earth's surface. Some people on Jihu might have been right. Humans were like a virus existing on the Earth's surface, and now the Earth was running a fever, attempting to eliminate the virus through this high fever. This was the end of humanity. What are you thinking about? Hurry up and give me a hand. It's about to fall. Lu Zhou, carrying 2 boxes of mineral water, passed by me. The bottles, distorted by the intense heat, were all crooked. One bottle that had slipped out of the plastic bag was on the verge of falling, and I quickly reached out to steady it. I wondered how he could have stored so much mineral water at home. Over these days, he had brought over at least a dozen boxes in total. I'm wondering if the temperature will keep rising, I said as I helped him move the mineral water into the bedroom and placed the bottles one by one into the freezer. During the hottest days recently, I had been so desperate for coolness that I had wished I could crawl into the freezer. You should think of something positive. Think about whether the temperature will drop today. It dropped by half a degree yesterday. Lu Zhou pursed his lips, which were somewhat chapped. No matter how much water we replenished, it couldn't withstand such intense heat. My lips were in no better condition. Actually, there's a possibility that we're about to evolve due to the heat. Haven't you noticed that we haven't suffered from heatstroke yet? He closed the freezer door until there was only a small gap left, grabbed his clothes and fanned himself vigorously. His face was flushed, and he was sweating profusely. I realized that he was really a gentleman. Except for that day when we took a shower in the rain. No matter how hot it was, he wouldn't expose his upper body when I was around. I was born without the heatstroke gene. When I was a child, I even went to the fields to work with my mom when it was 40 degrees. I shrugged. Upon hearing this, Lu Zhou turned to look at me with a broad smile, looking like a fool. You call that the heatstroke gene? What a coincidence. None of my ancestors for 3 generations had the heatstroke gene either. In my entire life, I've never had heatstroke. My best record was playing basketball under the sun at 39 degrees, and making 3 opponents and 2 teammates all suffer from heatstroke and end up in the hospital. I was the one who called the ambulance for them, he boasted. Wow, that's amazing. Cheers. I took out a bottle of beverage and handed one to him as well. We didn't have many beverages left. Every bottle we drank meant one less. But we still had to carry on with our lives, didn't we? Cheers, cheers. Lu Zhou took the bottle. We happily opened the caps together and took a big gulp. Ah, so refreshing. He let out a sigh and promptly lay down on the floor. The beverage had been in the freezer overnight, so of course it was refreshing. Under the high temperature, we needed the cold air from the freezer to cool down, so we couldn't completely seal it. Coupled with its insufficient power, the ice layer in the freezer had long since melted. Now it was almost at the same temperature as the freshness, keeping compartment. It could only get slightly cold at night. If we didn't drink it now, the coldness would dissipate soon. I imitated him and lay down on the floor, gazing at the crystal lamp on the ceiling. I had just replaced this lamp before the disaster struck, and it was still in pristine condition. With just a hint of light, it could shine brightly. Suddenly, I thought I saw the lamp swaying a few times. Was I seeing things? I rubbed my eyes, only to find that the lamp was swaying more and more violently. It's an earthquake. Lu Zhou sprang up in a flash, grabbed my arm, and almost dragged me off the floor. He swiftly threw me into the bathroom next to the bedroom and rushed in himself, looking around in a panic. The bathroom smelled awful because we hadn't flushed the toilet, but it was nothing compared to the panic brought about by the earthquake. This earthquake came without any warning and was extremely intense. I had heard that prolonged drought could trigger earthquakes, but I had only seen such statements on the internet and had never delved into it. After so many days of high temperature, our addled brains hadn't even thought of it. It caught us completely off guard. The building tilted, then returned to normal, tilted again, and then shook up and down, as if a giant snake was passing underneath. I let out a scream and clung tightly to the only person I could hold on to in front of me. Lu Zhou was much taller than me. He bent down and protected me tightly in his arms, staggering with me during the earthquake. We bumped into the walls beside us from time to time, and almost fell into the bathtub. When the earthquake finally subsided, all I could hear was the rapid thumping of our hearts and our ragged breathing. It was like we were convulsing. The building didn't collapse, but the bathroom door was skewed to one side. I slumped to the floor. Lu Zhou, leaning against the wall, walked out and cursed. This was what it meant to be in a desperate situation. This earthquake had damaged our life-saving solar panel. There was no way to repair it because 2/3 of it had been shattered, and the electrical box had caught fire. It had taken us great effort to find a fire extinguisher and put out the fire. The bedroom was in a complete mess. After putting out the fire, we were almost completely drained of our last bit of strength and slumped to the ground together. The sun in the sky seemed to be glaring at us malevolently. I could feel the fine hairs on my face curling up under the intense heat and getting embedded in my pores, causing sharp pain. In just a few hours, the high temperature would claim our lives. What was the temperature today as I heard on the radio yesterday? Was it 62 degrees? Or 66 degrees? After a moment of contemplation, I crawled up from the floor and began rummaging through the water and beverages in the freezer. What are you doing? Less chatter. Just give me a hand. I snapped. And then I simply told him to push the freezer away from the window and position it at the foot of the bed. I threw all the beverages inside onto the bed. Subsequently, I took off my shoes and stepped into the freezer. This won't work. In a little while, as the temperature rises, you might suffocate to death in here. It's not just me, it's us, I beckoned to him. To my surprise, Lu Zhou, or rather Zhou Zhou, took a step backward. I'm not going in. I have claustrophobia. You don't have to worry about me. Just sit down, and I'll put the beverages in for you to cool down. Maybe you can make it through, he said with a flickering gaze. What a lie. Claustrophobia, my foot. I curled my finger at him. Little brother, I've had a failed marriage in my life. I got out of it only after being severely beaten. If you don't mind me, come in. I don't want to hide anymore. I want to give myself a chance. I've realized that I quite like you. As the words left my lips, I saw Zhou Zhou's pupils dilate in shock. You. He swallowed hard. I looked at him solemnly, feeling the rising heat in the room, unable to tell whether the temperature was truly increasing, or if it was just my face that was heating up. I had just uttered the boldest words of my life. Zhou Zhou, would you be willing to die with me? 09. Whether one dies early or late, in the end, everyone has an inherent instinct to fear death and cherish life. I hoped that he would be like that too. Zhou Zhou turned his head away, and his face visibly flushed a deep shade of Zhugan Sura. My real name is Zhou Zhou. I'm 28 years old. I'm an online self-media person, not a game streamer. The money I earn can barely make ends meet. What a coincidence. As you heard before, my real name is Su Qingqing. I'm 31 years old and work as a salesperson in a software company. I earn enough money to support you. Would you like to be taken care of by me, little brother? Once a person becomes thick-skinned, they seem to reach a certain new level. At least I had won this debate that took place at the end of the world. Jojo, well, he was Jojo now. Finally, he nodded at me solemnly. Then he rushed into the bathroom, poured the remaining water into a bucket, carried it over, and poured it into the freezer. In perfect Wuqi, I opened a bottle of mineral water and emptied it into the freezer. After all the mineral water was poured in, it filled about a quarter of the bottom of the freezer. The whole process took less than 5 minutes, but the surrounding temperature had already reached a point where even breathing had to be done with extreme caution, as if taking a deep breath would mean inhaling a fireball. I sat in the water and made some space for Jojo. He threw a pile of unopened beverage bottles into the water, stuffed a small fan that still had some power left into my hand, and then climbed in himself. Although the freezer was quite large, it was still a tight fit for 2 adults. Especially Jojo. Even after sitting down, more than half of his head was still exposed. I shifted my position, moved beside him, and nestled into his arms, allowing his knees to bend, so that he could lie down in a rather cramped position. The water level didn't even reach our waists. I reached out and pulled the lid of the freezer almost shut, leaving only a small gap. Achoo! The temperature inside the freezer was now much lower than that outside, and I actually sneezed. Are you okay? Jojo asked nervously. I'm fine. Jojo, if we can survive this, can I take you to meet my parents? I wrapped my arms around his waist and rested my face on his shoulder. If we can make it out alive, I'll bring my household registration booklet and go with you to get the marriage certificate right away, he replied. You said it. You can't go back on your word. I definitely won't. But there's something you need to do for me too, Jojo said. What is it? You have to meet my group of brothers. They've all been laughing at me for being a shut-in who can't find a wife. Well, now I found one, and she's a beauty. They'll be so jealous. Jojo let out a laugh. The rare coolness, despite the uncomfortable position, made us feel much more at ease. Sure. If we can survive, I'll even do a live stream to express my love for you, I said. If only we could survive, everything would be possible. The temperature started to rise, accompanied by a series of aftershocks. I wasn't sure if it was just my imagination. Please, no more major earthquakes. This building couldn't withstand another violent shake. When the temperature reached a certain level, I turned on the small fan. The buzzing sound replaced the sound of our heartbeats, and the tiny flow of air was the only remaining source of life. We had to stay alive. I didn't know how much time had passed, but I actually fell asleep. When I woke up, the first thing I saw was Jojo's face. His dark, sunken eyes, his gaunt cheeks, and his unkempt stubble. He had his eyes closed, and his eyelashes were fluttering slightly, as if he was having a dream. Looking out from the freezer, I could see that the sky was still bright, but there seemed to be something different. Sound. Was that the sound of raindrops? I reached out through the gap in the freezer, and found that the temperature outside wasn't that high. I simply opened the freezer and stuck my head out. The torrential rain was pounding against the shattered glass. I saw that the sky outside was a sea of gray, and large drops of rain were falling from the sky. Some of the rainwater poured into the room, through the deformed window frame of the bay window, forming puddles on the floor. It was raining. I pinched my face, and it hurt. It was really raining. Lou. Jojo, it's raining. We've survived. We've survived. I excitedly slapped his face, trying to wake him up. But when I touched his face, it was burning hot. Jojo, don't scare me. I touched his forehead, and quickly climbed out of the freezer. Fortunately, he was awakened by me. It's raining? So cold. Yes, it's raining. You have a fever. Come out quickly, I said, helping him up. He slipped in the water, and his head hit the inner wall of the freezer with a loud thud, which made my heart skip a beat. With great difficulty, I dragged him onto the bed. I quickly took a quilt to dry his body, pulled off his upper garment, and wrapped him in a dry quilt. So hot, he said again, kicked off the quilt, turned over, and fell into a deep sleep, breathing rapidly. I stood there, at a loss as to what to do. I had never taken care of a patient before, and didn't know how to deal with the situation. Seeing that he had closed his eyes, I quickly covered him with the quilt again, leaving only his feet exposed, and then walked out of the bedroom. I hadn't been to the living room since the earthquake. It was in a complete mess. The TV had fallen and crushed half of the tea table. The display cabinet was leaning against the window of the living balcony. Dried meat and dried vegetables that hadn't been finished were scattered all over the floor, rolling everywhere. It was still somewhat bearable. I first found a pair of my shoes and put them on. Then I carefully lifted the TV, and took out the medicine box from the deformed drawer of the TV cabinet. Since I lived alone, I had stocked up on some cold medicine and anti-inflammatory drugs at home. Unfortunately, due to the previous epidemic, I hadn't been able to store any fever-reducing medicine at home. After a moment of hesitation, I took out a box of anti-inflammatory drugs, paired it with some vitamins, and went back to the bedside to feed them to him with a beverage. Fortunately, he was an obedient patient, and let me do what I needed to. After doing all this, I let him sleep and turned around to pick up a bucket and a wash basin from the floor, intending to collect some rainwater and store it. The raindrops kept hitting the windows, making a dull sound. The sounds, varying in pitch, intertwined. In the distance, there was also a rumbling sound, sometimes loud and sometimes soft like thunderclaps. I bypassed the obstacles on the floor and carefully approached the balcony. Just as I was about to put down the bucket and the wash basin, I looked up and saw the scene in the distance. Suddenly, my eyes widened and my body stiffened. As far as the eye could see, there was a huge, writhing yellow dragon in the distance, advancing with an unstoppable momentum. The white back of the dragon kept churning. Wherever it passed, tall buildings collapsed with a thunderous crash, and lower buildings were continuously engulfed and submerged. What I had heard wasn't thunder at all. It was the sound of the surging floodwaters crashing down one building after another. This couldn't be true. It had just started raining. How could there be such a massive flood? This was an inland area, and it couldn't be a tsunami either. Wait a minute. If it were a tsunami, what about those coastal cities? My hometown, my parents, were in a coastal city. The messages on the radio these days had been getting more and more formulaic. Was this what they were trying to cover up? I didn't dare to think any further. I just stood there, watching the yellow dragon approaching steadily, setting off bursts of thunderous roars. These buildings, which had been balsal by the high temperature and loosened by the earthquake, how could they possibly withstand the powerful impact of the flood? They were collapsing one after another. Only a few scattered buildings were still standing, but they were also precariously swaying in the wind, and it was only a matter of time before they fell. The ground beneath my feet began to shake. The flood was already very close. My legs went weak, and I almost fell to the ground. I managed to hold myself up and went back to the bedroom. Jojo was still asleep, seemingly oblivious to everything around him. I actually felt a bit envious of him. I climbed onto the bed, got under the covers and hugged him tightly. Jojo seemed to be awakened by me. He mumbled a few words and turned his head towards me. At least I would have a companion on the road to the afterlife. Rumble. With a deafening crash, like the collision of two trucks, the building suddenly shook violently. The few remaining pieces of glass shattered instantly. Tin bang. Dong. Chung. Amidst the crashing sounds, the crystal lamp on the ceiling fell directly down, hitting the quilt squarely. The connection between the wardrobe and the wall let out a harsh, piercing noise. Then the entire bed was overturned. I felt as if I had been thrown into the air, hit something, and then was abruptly pulled back by a hand. When I opened my eyes, it was Jojo holding my hand, his face filled with shock. His mouth opened and closed, but I couldn't hear his voice over the deafening noise. I grabbed his hand in return, and threw myself towards him with all my might. Finally, I managed to get back into his embrace. We hugged each other tightly, and tumbled through the air before landing. Bang! I lost consciousness. Perhaps it was just for an instant. The ground beneath us was still shaking, and I had already woken up. The building hadn't collapsed, but the exterior wall was gone. We were wrapped in the quilt. Jojo had one arm around me, and the other was inside the quilt. Both of my hands were underneath me, unable to move. The overturned freezer was pressing on us, making us cling closely to each other. From the look in his eyes, I could tell that we both must have looked quite disheveled at that moment. The 16th floor, he said hoarsely, coughing a few times. Our building has 33 floors. The 16th floor is right in the middle. It's the most earthquake-resistant position, and also the central axis of the vibrations. At the same time, it's the highest point that the local fire department's ladders can reach. Whether it was the rainwater or the water that had been poured into the freezer earlier, it was slowly soaking us. I felt a cool sensation on my thighs and wanted to look down, but he turned my chin and kissed me. Survive, Su Ching Ching. I was taken aback by the sudden kiss. We both have to survive. I still want to take you to meet my parents, get the marriage certificate with you. You have to do a video call with my brothers, so that I can show off my girlfriend, my wife. He kissed me again and buried his head in the crook of my neck. Jojo, can you get up? I asked him. I can't. I'm stuck, he said in a muffled voice. After a few seconds he added, I really regret it. What do you regret? I asked. He mumbled softly. I should have confessed my love to you right away when I first saw you open the door, and fell in love with you at first sight. I was just too timid, and now I'm about to die and I'm still a virgin. I almost burst out laughing. The shaking of my body made my chest feel stuffy, and it was really uncomfortable. We were really pressed tightly together now, so much so that I could hardly breathe. Little brother, if you had confessed your love to me then, I would have moved out the next day. It would have been better if you had moved out. Maybe you would have survived, he said quickly. I fell silent for a moment, and tried to move my hands. A sharp pain shot through them. In fact, I also felt a bit regretful. If I hadn't gone back to the bedroom in those last few seconds, but had stayed on the balcony instead, I would surely have been thrown out, and either drowned, crashed to death, or been smashed to death by the waves. I wouldn't be here pretending to be calm and waiting for death. The water in the room was rising steadily. The water outside had finally seeped in, and was swirling under my forehead. Don't move. I'll try to climb out, I said. Then I secretly gathered my strength, and wriggled my body. It wasn't stuck that tightly. When I really started to move out, there were still some gaps. Enduring the intense pain of my arm rubbing against something unknown, I managed to pull one hand out from underneath me, and the pressure suddenly decreased. A drop of Jojo's sweat fell on my face. He forcefully propped up his body with one arm, coordinating with my movements. I crawled out slowly, wriggling in the water, and finally freed my other hand. Using both hands, I crawled out from underneath him. Dong! Jojo fell face down into the water. Are you okay? I called out to him immediately. Only after crawling out did I realize that the water on the floor was all tinged with red. I'm not going to die. He also crawled out and wiped the water off his face. I noticed that his other hand was twisted behind his back. It should be broken, and a sharp piece of glass was protruding from his left ankle. But I wasn't in much better shape either. There was a deep gash on the back of my right leg, and blood was still oozing out. The water level in the room had risen significantly, and was almost up to my ankles. Many people claim that they aren't afraid of death every day, but the human desire for life often reaches its peak, just before the brink of death. He and I exchanged a glance, and in perfect tacit understanding, we hopped out together. We passed by the collapsed wall next to the security door, and jumped onto the stairs where the steel bars were exposed. Only by going upwards could we survive. Adrenaline enabled us to struggle and climb 2 floors, and finally, we collapsed in the corridor on the 18th floor. Jojo gasped for breath a few times, then reached out and pulled at my clothes, lifting them up. I flinched. What are you doing? Could it be that he wanted to have sex before he died? I didn't have the strength for that. Your thigh needs to be stopped from bleeding. Take off your clothes and tie them around it, he said. Why don't you take off yours? Because I'm afraid of the pain. He pointed to his twisted arm, that was still behind his back. I thought for a moment, untied my shoelaces, and tied them tightly a few centimeters above the wound. The blood was still flowing, but the flow rate had decreased a bit. It should be almost out of blood. The blood loss made me start to feel dizzy and my body turn cold. Forget it. Let me jump down from there, I said, pointing to the window in the corridor where even the window frame was nowhere to be found. Now it was like a wind tunnel, and there was a continuous whooshing sound of the wind coming from inside. No way. I have to die before you. Otherwise, it would sound too embarrassing if it got out. Jojo got up, limped over. Ampadal that wind tunnel. Then he looked outside and started to shed tears. What are you crying for? We've managed to hold on until now, which means we've lived longer than many people. Maybe we won't even have to queue up in the underworld, I quipped. He turned his head and wiped his face. Honey, come and see God. I'm an atheist, I said feebly. No, you have to come. It's really beautiful. Jojo hopped over and tried to pull me up from the ground. Afraid of making him fall, I forced myself to stand up. The two of us, both disabled and struggling to stay alive, assisted each other and leaned against that wind tunnel. The wind blew through my wet bangs. I raised my eyes and looked outside, wanting to see if I could have the same hallucination as him. Suddenly my eyes widened. My eyes were wet at the corners, and my tears also fell. I saw a flag. It was red, with 5 stars printed on it, 1 big star and 4 small ones surrounding it. There was also a blue-gray ship and black small boats breaking through the waves. On the boats were those most lovable people. 11. Jojo's side story. Have you ever seen a beauty at first sight? The elder sister living opposite me isn't very tall. She ties her hair into a bun, and her eyes are really beautiful. When Xiao Chun from the property management came to make a door-to-door notice, I took a fancy to her at the first glance. Unfortunately, I was such a coward that I didn't dare to look at her too much. After listening to Xiao Chun's notice, I quickly closed the door. Only after closing the door did I start to regret it. Was I being impolite just now? I stayed up late editing videos again last night. I had just woken up, and my hair must have been a mess like a chicken coop. It's all over. The first impression I gave the pretty sister opposite was really bad. I have to think of a way to make up for it. How about asking her if she needs her computer fixed? Would it be too strange to go now? Should I wait for a few more days? The temperature was incredibly high, and extreme high-temperature weather of varying degrees appeared all over the world. The power went out. It was so hot. I rummaged through the small refrigerator at home, and unexpectedly found that there was still an ice cream in it. And I didn't know how long I had left it there. Wait a minute. Was this a chance given to me by heaven? Holding the ice cream, I finally summoned up the courage to walk to her door, and rang the doorbell with trembling hands. Ding dong, ding dong. I was so nervous that I was sweating profusely. The doorbell rang for half a minute, and she opened the door a crack. She was wearing a t-shirt and sports shorts, and her beautiful eyes were full of vigilance. Oh no, was I being too abrupt? I just called the property management, and they said it would be another half an hour. You must be really hot. Have an ice cream to cool down. I have a lot more. If you're hot, you can come and get some from me. I didn't even know what I was saying, and right after I said it, I regretted it again. You asked for it. What if she asked me for other ice creams? Thank you, but no need. I didn't know whether it was fortunate or unfortunate that she refused me. After thinking for a while, I still placed the ice cream on the shelf beside her door and turned back home. Then I quickly rushed to the peephole. She opened the door and accepted the ice cream I gave her. She accepted it. I'm so happy. What should I give her next? Would mineral water be okay? On such a hot day, she surely wouldn't refuse water. It's such a delightful decision. Later, I'll give her water. Anyway, because I'm not used to drinking tap water and plain boiled water, I've stocked up a whole room full of mineral water. Thanks to this strange habit of mine, I've instead become a current water resources tycoon. I could even provide her with enough water for a bath. Dear residents. Dear residents. Please note that our city is facing a high-temperature disaster, and the solar panels in the community have been damaged by the sun. However, the weather didn't cooperate. Half an hour later, looking at the temperature displayed on my phone, and combining it with the words of the property management, I thought it was more important for me to survive first, and I could consider the matter of courting a girl later. With this in mind, I quickly packed some food and drinks, grabbed the car keys, and hesitated for a moment before opening the door. I brought my eye close to the peephole. Maybe Yeah, the pretty sister opposite had indeed packed some things, and was about to go out. I almost opened the door at the same time as her. I nodded at her, and put on an extremely reliable expression. Follow me. My car's fuel tank is full. I must have looked super cool at that moment. But why did she take a step back after hearing me? Did I scare her? Damn it. You asked for it, you asked for it. I pinched myself in my mind, and quickly softened my tone to tell her that I had no ill intentions. Maybe because I was so sincere, she agreed to go downstairs with me. I walked in front, and confirmed with the corner of my eye, that she was always following behind me. I actually started to have some wild thoughts. Oh, the image of a husband leading and a wife following. She wanted to take that old man on the 5th floor with us. But the old man scared her away with his harsh words. After thinking for a while, I decided to leave a bottle of water for the old man. If we were going to do a good deed, we should do it together as a couple. She got into my car, and now we were in the same space. Damn it. I forgot that there were still some fruits in the car that I hadn't thrown out. So embarrassing. But I learned her name. Her name is Fong Qing, such a lovely name. I didn't dare to say that my name was Zhou Zhou. After thinking for a while, I used my mother's surname, and told her that my name was Lu Zhou. Otherwise, I was afraid that like many people who heard my name, she would think that a grown man having a name with repeated characters was disgusting. Damn it again. I realized that I was such a fool. The air handling unit in the basement had stopped working, and the air wasn't circulating. With so many cars and so many air conditioners, not only would the temperature surely rise later, but also, due to the insufficient combustion of gasoline, carbon monoxide would accumulate. If we stayed in the parking lot, we could be poisoned at any time. I had to take Fong Qing and climb back up to the 16th floor. I was guilty. I made her suffer. When we took a break in the middle, we ran into Xiao Chun from the property management, and he brought me an unfortunate piece of news. It wasn't about eliminating the COVID-19 virus. It was about eliminating people. The extreme high temperature weather of 56 degrees made me stunned. I could only let Fong Qing make the decision herself. No matter what decision she made, I would support her. Later, she decided to go upwards. She told me the password of her house. She invited me into her house. Is this what a girl's house is like? It really smells so good. And even the bathroom smells nice. Later on, the high temperature became our matchmaker. I don't know if I should love this matchmaker. In any case, thank you, the high temperature matchmaker, for helping me end my 28-year single life. Please stay away from us in the future, and also stay away from humanity. High temperature earthquake flood. This chain of natural disasters that occurred in the summer of 2022 gradually subsided, and the floodwaters receded. Because my leg injury hadn't healed yet, I had been recuperating. Su Qingqing recovered faster than me. In the past few days, she had already started to participate in coordinating the post-disaster reconstruction of several communities. I think she's so amazing. She really lives up to being my wife. My father-in-law and mother-in-law are even more amazing. I heard that they donated the mountain to the higher authorities as a shelter, and it's a key temporary resettlement area. Now the communication has been restored. It's just a pity that the transportation is inconvenient, and I can't go to see them immediately. After this disaster is over, I must remind her to take me home to meet her parents as soon as possible. The most important thing is to get the marriage certificate, so that I can show off in front of my group of brothers, who says that this shut-in of mine is destined to be single for life. I managed to find a wife in just over 20 days. I hope everyone is still alive.